as we continue our discussion on five-element theory, specifically understanding the earth element part 2. Now this is part 2 on our lecture on earth elements, so if you have not watched and thoroughly understand part 1, please go back and do so. Way of reminder, this is Dr. Hollis, Executive Director here at the International Institute of Natural Wellness Education, and by proceeding you agree to the following terms, including that all information and statements herein have not been evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration, are not intended to diagnose, prevent, treat, or cure any disease, are for informational purposes only, and by proceeding you agree not to attempt to apply any principle or practice outlined herein unless you are otherwise licensed to do so. You can visit us online at knowyourwellness.org. Now this is one of the lectures that we make available for people that would like to get an idea about our classes so they can audit and watch this lecture online. If you're interested in watching other lectures that we have available, make sure to subscribe on YouTube and go to Facebook, Know Your Wellness, and we'll post new videos as they're uploaded there. So make sure to like and subscribe so you can see new videos as they come out. So with that, I will jump right in. Another quick reminder, please don't post or email us with questions. If you're our students, you work directly with your clinical advisors, but for those that are just auditing the course, I'm sorry, we cannot answer medical questions in the posts. So with that, let's jump right into things, shall we? All right, so we laid the foundation for understanding in part 1. We laid the foundation for understanding what the earth element is, understanding the personalities, the body characteristics, and so on. So now let's go over, and so we're going to spend the majority of our time on the 5-element chart here. Now, as you'll notice, I've went ahead and color-coded that. You don't have the color-coded version, and no, there's not a downloadable color one. You have to go ahead and color code it yourself. But I want to make sure, and you can do that in whatever colors you want, but let me explain the colors that I've done here for our discussion today. The green are for things that are really useful in balancing. Green is go, it helps to balance. Now the purple was closest I could get to our red here. The purple are things that are noticeable when that element is out of balance. So that's where you'll notice some of these things. Now, the yellow are things that have kind of some double meaning, and we'll talk about those at the end. They didn't really fully fit in either category. And then the one I'm going to start off with is number 11 right here. Now, number 11, the reason it's its own color, if we scroll back up to here, is we've been talking a lot about dominant elements. That's been the bulk of our discussion today is dominant elements. And so to finish off that discussion, there's two things that I want to point out. One is going to be right here. That's the shape. Do you remember me just talking about how people that are commonly are a dominant earth element, they have a wide jowl was the word we used, but it's actually the lower jaw is wide on the lateral side, not underneath the chin like some people might think. Well, that shape is what's associated when we're talking about face analysis. And so that's why that shape is right there. As you can remember, they often have maybe more square faces, but towards the bottom, their jawline is a little wider than the top of their face. The other thing that deals very commonly with understanding of dominant elements is number 11, which is the stress response. This particular one, and again, anybody, if you're really out of balance in earth element, when you get stressed to the max, you could overreact. No doubt about it. Anybody that is out of balance, what we see is because people are dominant, if you were a dominant earth element, that would be a real common one for you to go out of balance in. Because your personality and everything related to that is such a predominant thing, as a result, you'll often either be under or over fire or over earth element. I'm a fire, and I often am under fire is a common out of balance fact for me because my personality is so fire driven. I do so much fire related activities that then I run out of fire. So the same with earth. So what you're going to watch for is when you see people that are real commonly overreact is their stress response when they get stressed. You're going to help them see, and again, it's really it's really freeing for people to, instead of just beating themselves up that they overreacted, help them understand. If that's you, understand that's the natural stress response for an earth element. Doesn't mean it's okay and you should just say, oh, I just overreact all the time. No, what you need to help them do is understand that before they get to that point, when they're feeling high levels of stress, they need to come back, and as we've talked, they need to look at the balancing things. The foods, the activities. We have a whole separate discussion on herbs and nutrients to help balance each of these elements, so we're not going to go into that in this module, but we will in other modules. But you're going to have them do these things before they get to that overreact state. Okay, so that's really the value in understanding, is so that you can then manage it more in a more balanced way than just going stress, 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 overreact, then you feel bad about it, come back, stress, 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 overreact. We're trying to avoid that. So that kind of wraps up everything related to dominant elements. So now we'll be talking just a little more of out of balance. And so all of what we're going to talk about, unless otherwise specified, is just of all of these. We have all of these elements within us. So what happens when we're out of balance with this particular element? Now, we have, as you know, the other modules, some of you may have been through, that talk about the interaction between elements. That's another discussion that, again, we're not going to go into. What I want you to understand in this lecture is each of these individual things listed right here. So let's start by talking about the ones that you see in purple. These are common indicators that that element is out of balance. Muscle. What I mean by that, as you know, every element has muscles attached to it. What I'm talking about here is muscle imbalance, muscle fatigue, muscle that is structurally not very sound, tears easy, anything related to muscle dysfunction. Can't put on muscle. All of those things are real common when this element is out of balance. Mouth is another one. Now, when I say mouth, that's the sense organ. If you look down here on our chart, that's the sense organ. Mouth is really related, though, to eating imbalances. So all of the different, not digestive imbalances, but the eating imbalances where people overeat or don't eat, or all of those things are tied very heavily to mouth. And so when I start to see those eating imbalances, and then you start to question if again, we're not going to base anything off of just one factor, but we start to look at if possibly the earth element could be out of balance as a result. As we go down to number 7, worry. Worry is such a big one for these individuals. Now, as you look at the fluid secretion, salivary. So over saliva production is going to be common when wood element is out of balance. Now, if you think about saliva, we've talked in our digestive discussions how food is broken down into the 3 parts. And the digestive process for carbohydrates starts in the mouth, for proteins starts in the stomach, for fats the emulsification process with the bile coming out of the gallbladder is in the small intestine. So you've got mouth, stomach, small intestine, the 3 locations for carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. So as we look at this, notice that in this element is the pancreas, which would deal greatly with carbohydrate assimilation and properly breaking down carbohydrates. We also have the salivary glands as a possible imbalance. So I don't just look at this when someone has an over saliva production, an overactive saliva glands, but also if I know that there is an enzyme imbalance that would normally break down carbohydrates, specifically the amylase or salivary amylase that should be released in the saliva glands. That could be a parotid gland imbalance. So if there's blood sugar handling problems, I am thinking it could be enzyme related. That's when I might look at this element as a possible factor. Flesh is the tissue, as you know down here, external manifestation. So as we go around, you think of things like here's skin and hair. This one is head hair. Nails, these are manifestations, like in this one is nails are brittle. If we come over here, complexion, might have a lot of complexion problems. Flesh is one that's a little harder for people to talk about or to understand what it's talking about, but it's fleshiness. An imbalance, and again, every time I teach this, anybody that has a few extra pounds thinks, oh, that's me. Well, not necessarily. Although this is a very common one to be out of balance. I mean, how common is the pancreatic dysfunction and blood sugar handling problems and stomach problems. This is a really common element because of societal problems that come as a result of our modern mainstream society. So, you know, think of immune problems. All of these can be a real common problem one. Now let's talk about, for a minute, about things that help balance. So this one is the, if we start with number 5 here, this is the one that's probably the most confusing out of all of the number 5s. Number 5 is the taste, and that taste will help stimulate the healing reaction. So, you know, the taste for spice is so helpful in cardiovascular and function, and we see on the heart that we're dealing with number 5 being bitters, another one. So the bitter, you know, greens is so helpful for small intestine. So this one, when we get into here, the reason it's talking sweet is you've got to go back, because people would take that for sweet. You've got to understand that when this was created, it wasn't when they had candies and cookies and cakes. So if you go back to foods that build, do you remember how it talked about naturally sweet things like carrots and parsnips and turnips and squash, and you know, those are what we're talking about when we talk about the taste. It's a hard one to explain to people because in our modern society that has such an excess consumption of highly processed carbohydrates, people see sweet and they think, oh, sweets are good for that. No, not sweets. But that sweet flavor triggers the release of the amylases that will help break down carbohydrates, and it also sends through the signaling mechanism to the pancreas to prepare for the blood assimilation of sugars that will be released in the bloodstream through the hepatic pathway. So that's what you've got to understand. Be very clear on that. It's not sweets are balancing for this, but this naturally sweet but don't have a lot of sugar content, like a carrot or something like that, that are going to help nourish that. Now, as we go down the list, trust. Trust is a very big thing. Do you remember, as we talked about here, the healing reactions and how important stability and loyalty is? So if this system is out of balance, making sure they're around people they trust and they're in circumstances they trust. And you as a clinician, if you're their master herbalist, make sure that you're explaining things very well and competently so that they can trust and feel secure in you. Now, late summer. Again, this is the season, but don't think of it as a time of year. Again, we go back to the agrarian society 2,000 years ago when this type of chart was created. And we think of this society that happened in late summer. It isn't about the time of year, it's about the society that happened. Now, what happened in late summer? That was the time when people were coming together, harvest festivals, a lot of the gathering with longtime friends. You know, summer was historically a time for travel, a time for heavy labor and a lot of work. So a lot of times it was coming back together with old friends that you maybe hadn't seen in a long time. And again, that coincides with what we've talked about under the healing reactions of how important it is to help build for these people to, you know, get back to good company. Do you remember right here when we talked about good company and I mentioned old friends and people they trust? That's what we're talking about here. Trust, late summers, getting together with old friends. Now, the movement for them is the transportation. So as we look down here under our key, that's the development cycle. Transportation. Things getting done is very secure. Not change, not transformation, transportation. So things getting done, accomplished, seeing other things come to fruition, plans, that's really nourishing for them, not to be confused with transition. That will throw somebody that already has an out of balance element. And again, this isn't just for earth elements that are dominant. This is just anybody that has this out of balance earth element, okay? So that's where we start to look. Now let's walk through the yellow one here. This is a really fun one, the number 3 on this list. I probably see this more than I do in anyone else or any other ones. As we've talked in some of the other lectures, we give you the fingers that are common, and a lot of you aren't going to use that. We use it a lot in manual therapies and Jinshin Jitsu. However, the thumb is one that we see really holds true a lot. Because as you see, the out of balance emotion, remember that we talk about is worry, number 7. So worry is the out of balance emotion that's most commonly associated here. So as we look at worry, think of children. How common it is for infants that don't understand what's going on. There's a lot of worry is a common emotion for those new infants. And how many of them suck their thumb? That's why those two go together. We also see that when people are very worried, sometimes without even realizing it, they'll grasp their thumb and hold their hands kind of one in front of another, grasping their thumb, or they'll kind of cross their hands and they'll squeeze on a thumb really tightly. If you notice, you'll see that happening to, when people are really worried. In worry situation, you know, the old adage of wringing your hands together often was grasping your thumb. And so there is a natural tie to the meridian vessel system of acupuncture or acupressure and the thumb itself. And there's a tie to those meridian vessels, the yin and yang earth element, and trying to bring those into balance when you feel an excess of that worry emotion. So it's kind of a fascinating one. Now, singing, do you remember when I mentioned, which is number 4 on this list, do you remember when I mentioned aerobic activity? Well, one of the reasons aerobic activity, as I explained to you then, was for breathing. Singing is another really common one. Now, you'll see this in somebody that is a naturally dominant earth element. They'll just sing a lot. It's a natural thing for them to sing. But it's also useful when you're looking at somebody that is just out of balance, whether they're a dominant or not, singing songs. You know, think of how common it is to get together with old friends, and especially coming into the holiday season, and you sing songs together. All those things are so balancing and nurturing. So that one, number 4, you could put it as a green for balancing if you wanted, but it actually does a little crossover because it sometimes is also useful in assessing what the dominant element really might be. So really useful from all the way around. Now these last 2, you've heard me say this. If you've listened to any of the others, well, that was just off. Let's try that again. You've heard me say that in the others, is that I put these on here to be aware of, so that if I know someone is out of balance in their earth element, I'm going to watch these muscles, the quadriceps, and I'm going to watch to see if they have any structural imbalance that I might recommend. If they complain of it, I might recommend and help them see that when that's out of balance, that can be a common thing. And they might recommend going to a massage therapist that's licensed to do that, or if you have modalities that can treat that, you might be aware of it. But as you've heard me say before, don't be very, very cautious of using this as an assessment of when someone comes in and says they've got problems, you know, with the quadriceps, or they've really been hurting. Don't jump right to thinking, oh, that's probably an earth element imbalance, because as you've heard me say, our society today, we spend so much time doing activities that sitting in front of computers and repetitive actions. There's so many injuries today with car wrecks and other injury problems that musculoskeletal things are just a tricky one to say is a result. So hopefully that gives you a little understanding of what these are for. Spleen, one other thing, I will make a couple comments on spleen. Spleen has a lot to do with overall constitution, but also has a lot, we talk about in Chinese medicine, we talk as we scroll down here, that metal is our defense, it's our shield, it's our immune response. But as you notice this chart, it's the earth element that builds this element. So though we will sometimes teach the metal element is the shield and the protector, a lot of the vitality of your body's immune and defensive potential come through, in Chinese medicine, the spleen or the earth element. So when we start to see imbalances in that, we consider this. Stomach we've talked about, pancreas, but I wanted to take a minute and so you understood this one, because frankly a lot of people are just confused at the spleen and what it does, and we have the whole lectures we go through specific on that, but just keep that in mind to tie to the defense and its role in nourishing the blood and strengthening the defensive properties of the metal air element. So with that, I hope you're starting to see all these come together, and I gotta say, sometimes this can seem like a arduous task to go through and learn all these, but it is so valuable. I don't know what I would do without it, and not just as a naturopath or as a master herbalist or advanced nutrition consultant, but in every area to start to understand people. It really becomes a part of you. You see it in the way people walk, the way they respond to things, and you start to have a greater ability to help and to reach out and to be caring to those around you. It is really a valuable tool, and above all, you start to understand yourself a lot better, and then you give yourself the ability to be who you authentically are, and you will find that your life and what you feel you've been called to do goes so much better when you truly are true to who you really are. So with that, thank you for participating in this lecture for our students, and for those of you that are auditing this course. Again, thank you for participating. Make sure to subscribe, like us on Facebook, so as we give you new courses to consider that you can watch those. And then as always, visit us online at knowyourwellness.org and see if we have classes locally in your area or for our online program in Master Herbology and Advanced Nutrition. Thanks so much for your time, and until next time, this is Dr. Hollis.